Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Ray.
Come on, bark like a dog for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again, the cool jazz sounds, if you will, of the Barney Miller theme. David Cohen here, Douglas Viviani with David Cohen, the Gumshoe himself. Why are you playing that theme, David?
Well, as many of our listeners might know, that's the theme to Barney Miller, and we're so honored to have with us Barney Miller himself, Mr. Hal Linden, whose career, believe it or not, Doug,
yes,
started in 1950 when Hal was a big band musician and singer after he served in the Army during the Korean War. And he began a Broadway career, winning Best Actor Tony Award for his portrayal of Maya Rothschild in the musical The Rothschilds. And, of course, in 1974, he made the move to television, where he started the whole Barney Miller phenomenon, of which you and I were big fans. And Hal was nominated for 7 Emmy, 3 Golden Globe Awards. And so we're very honored to have Mr. Hal Linden with us.
Wait a minute, there's more. Since the end of Barney Miller in 1982, he continued his career in films and television, including roles but in these shows, but not limited to these shows of like Touched by an Angel, The Nanny, Drew Carey Show, Law and Order, Will and Grace, King of Queens, The Mindy Project 2, Broke Girls, The American Housewife. David, what do you think of this?
That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive.
We're not only that, we're going to have some fun with Hal Linden. Thank you, Mr. Linden, for joining us on Everything Old is New Again.
That's my ringtone. on my telephone is the Barney Miller theme.
How about that?
Wow.
Yes.
Keeping it alive and
well.
well.
You did my whole career. I'm ready to leave now.
Yeah, problem is we only have like 5 more minutes left of the show, so no, I'm kidding.
There you go.
And also, we're excited. We're going to talk about the Samuel Project, which is something that you're, involved in now. It looks like a poignant and meaningful film that's coming out shortly. And but first, I just want to let you know that certainly our audience on Everything Old is New Again, when we celebrate the past and introduce it to those who haven't experienced it, and Barney Miller and this Danny Arnold that created it, he wrote for Martin Lewis, believe it or not, if anybody remembers the Caddy and Bewitched and That Girl. I mean, this was to me a groundbreaking show, and when you were presented with this project, did you have any idea that where the show would go? I know there were 2 pilots, but after the second pilot and it was picked up, did you feel that this was going to be an 8-year show, or what'd you feel about the project in the beginning?
In the theater, I did something like 20 Broadway and off-Broadway plays, and I never went to an opening night party to good reviews. So one does not, you get a job, it's as long as the job lasts. So I never had never imagined that it would last 8 years. And certainly that it would be the kind of iconic collection that it ended up being.
And I think some of the reason for that is the writing of the show. Certainly there was...
Oh, no, excuse me. Yeah. All of the reason. All of the reason for that is the writing of the show. This was not a show where we came in and ad-libbed lines and came up with funny lines. This was every script was tailored specifically to the story, and it was all the writing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I just would add a modicum of a statement to that it, certainly if it was not presented or by the actors properly,
well, that's always the case. But I've seen shows with great casts that died because it didn't have the writing, and I've seen shows with presentable casts that worked because it had the writing. I'm afraid that's that's what counts.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'm going to play a very short clip just to give a piece of feeling for the character that you portrayed and the smart writing that entailed. Just give me 2 seconds.
If somebody came up to you and said, how many poles does it take to make popcorn? You wouldn't appreciate that, would you?
No.
And I can understand that. But I could never feel what you're feeling. Because I'm not Polish.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
I can understand it, but that's as close as I can get.
Now, certainly there's more to that, and I apologize. It's too short a clip to give that real justice, but because there's a great punchline to that as well, right? If you remember that. But it did go a long way to show the way your presentation and of the writing of, that was talking about bigotry and how it affects each of us differently, and it was just done so smartly and so well. It's just one example of, I think, what you achieved in that show.
You know where they got their ideas for scripts? They would sit around and read the newspaper.
See that?
And all they had to do was read the newspaper, and a storyline would come flying out of the newspaper, because it was today, it was about life, it was about what we were living. Almost every story that came out of the morning newspaper.
Yeah, that's how.
Yeah,
it did, and it did. I think it did translate that way, because it was a very realistic show. In that, I have a cousin that's a police officer, and I've talked to him about this, and your show, especially, it was a little ways in the past, and so it was one of these, the first, I would say, that was very realistic in its presentation of a detective's room in a precinct. In that, there wasn't always shoot 'em ups, and there wasn't always all this action going on.
Joe Wambaugh said, and Joe Wambaugh should know, Joe Wambaugh said it was the most realistic police show. Not only the best, but the most realistic. Now think about that, a comedy show being the most realistic.
Right.
And Danny Arnold, who created it, was the one who set the parameters for all of us. Because, we would come up with pretty funny actors and come up in rehearsal and say, here's a funny bit we can do. And Danny would say, here was the limitation. He said to all of us, now these were the cops of the 12th precinct. He said, would you go to a police officer for help who behaves like that? We had to be real cops who could do our jobs sensitively. Now the people who came in and the perps and the complainants, they could be as nutty as they could be, but the cops, we had to be real. We had to be believable, plausible. Those were the limitations that Danny set.
And Hal, what was it that attracted you to the Barney Miller show? Was that one of the components that made it, compelling enough for you to sort of stop Broadway for a while? It was a very personal reason. I had a lot of, quite honestly, a lot of offers that year because I had just come off winning the Tony on Broadway, and Hollywood kind of discovered me and was looking to use me, so I had a lot of offers. Danny's show was the only sitcom which shot in front of an audience, and I figured my experience was in front of an audience, so I thought I would be best served by being in front of an audience, and that's why I selected Barney. It turned out to be I was totally wrong because when you film, the audience is in the camera, not in the people sitting watching you. The audience is the camera, and I had to kind of learn that on my feet.
How about that? We're here.
So it was a strange reason for picking Barney, but I picked it for that reason. It was also, I think, well written. I wouldn't have selected if I didn't like the material, but it was kind of wonderful material right off the bat.
And speaking of well written, we're going to be back right after this and Everything Old is New Again and talk to Mr. Hal Linden about the Samuel Project, starring himself and Disney star Ryan Ochoa, who will premiere. It's going to premiere on April 28th. The red carpet begins at 6:30. The film at 7. So if you're around town in Los Angeles, you want to get some tickets, go to lajfilmfest.org. lajfilmfest.org. Premiere is April 28th. We'll be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, this is Alan Alda, and you're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
It feels indecent.
You've been trying to do something indecent for 6 months now.
A new life.
There we go. This is Everything Old is New Again with David Cohen, Douglas Viviani. We're happy to welcome Barney Miller himself, Hal Linden, to the microphone.
Did you bring Alan in just to do that introduction?
He actually was a guest. I was going to mention that on our show for an hour, and he did that nice introduction for us. And I did a little research and found out that certainly you were in that movie that he wrote and directed. Was he? This is kind of a trick question, but
we also appeared on Broadway together.
Oh, I didn't realize that. And what was that?
Yes, in The Apple Tree, a musical by Harnick and Bach in 1960-something, 67, I think it was. A wonderful musical. Wasn't a big hit, but Alan played Adam, as in Adam and Eve,
right.
And I played the devil, the snake.
Oh wow! If I go back in time, I could see that. That looks like
Yes.
That would be great. Was he as pleasant and thoughtful and professional as we found him to be? I mean,
Alan. I'll tell you. Here's it. We were on Broadway together. Now the theater was on 52nd Street, I believe, and I lived on 101st. So on a two-show day, in between, I would go out and have some dinner or something, and then come back, lie down, take a rest, and go where again. And I was 50 blocks from where I lived. Alan lived in, I believe it was Clifton, New Jersey, and he would get in his little Volkswagen and go up across the George Washington Bridge to Clifton, New Jersey, so he could have dinner with his family.
Wow.
And come right back and do the second show.
That's amazing.
That was the difference. Yes, I always was totally amazed by that. That's the kind of guy Alan is.
How about that? So I'm glad I played that to kind of show off a little bit to you, but it brought out a great memory. Let's just listen to a small clip of a little coming attraction or a bit of the trailer of the Samuel Project, just to introduce the audience to this project.
What am I supposed to say then?
Look, he's your grandfather. Just talk to him. It'll be fine.
Eli, still doodling, huh? Make a living doing that?
Depends on how good a doodler you are. We have to find something historic that intrigues us. And to me, that's you.
You want to tell the story of an old dry cleaner? What I do remember, I don't want to remember. I'm done remembering.
What was it like back then?
Different. Do you know anything about the war? What happened?
So that's a little piece of it. It's not the entire trailer, but gives us a little flavor for the idea that a teen is kind of reintroducing himself, or vice versa, to his grandfather for this school project and talking about the grandfather's past. And I think it seems to be right up our alley. What do you think?
Well, basically, yeah, you picked you really pointed out what the picture's about. It's about three generations: grandfather, father, and his son. I play the son, by the way. Not the grand. As most generations, there's a kind of a communication gap between them. The father is a real estate salesman who's busting his butt trying to make sales and sitting with open houses and stuff like that. He doesn't have time for the kid. The grandfather has his own dry cleaning business where he does all the work. There's just two of them in the shop. And he, once a month he sees the son, hasn't seen the grandson. They don't talk. There's no communication. Until the boy gets a project where he has to tell a story that's historical, and he zones in on his grandfather's story. Grandfather, a survivor of World War II from Germany, a Holocaust survivor, if you will. And most Holocaust survivors really don't want to talk about it. It's painful, and as he says in that clip, I don't remember too much. What I do remember, I don't want to remember. So he has to kind of get the story out of Grandpa, and to do this art project because he's an artist. So the drawing, animation, whatever he puts together for the project.
See, and that's
what comes out is that even though they don't communicate, it's art that brings them together. That art can be more eloquent than words very often. And basically that's what the picture is about the boy doing the project about his grandfather.
And that's the unique part about it is the art. He's an illustrator, this grandson, and I think that's a different take on this kind of a story. And further, just to let you know, I mean, everything old is new again. We kind of say it in our title, but we respect and appreciate the entertainment of today, but we recognize that it has a foundation in the past, and this story truly represents that, in that the art, the life, the lessons that are experienced between grandfather and grandson represent pretty much what we're talking about, that everything old is new again, and I think we'll see in this project that the grandfather might teach a lesson to the son and the grandson, and vice versa. No,
it isn't only teaching that the grandfather teaches the lesson. It's the doing of the project that teaches the lesson. That the boy wants to draw. He draws, but he's into fantasy drawing and monsters and whatnot. And it isn't until he gets the project that you see him do the research and learning about what happened. Not only, as the grandfather says to him, "Do you know anything about World War II?" Probably very little. And having to do the project is what illuminates his world. And you see even the style of his drawing changes, becomes, he's not just doing fantasy stuff anymore. Now he's doing real stuff. Art and education come together. And that's basically what the picture's about.
Right, and that certainly is an important element that we would hope that exists in the high schools today. And David, you wanted to say something about where Mr. Linden went to high school? Or?
Oh, yeah. I just saw an interesting fact. How the high school you went to eventually merged into LaGuardia High School,
right?
Which is the Fame High School, I think people would know it as. And my son graduated from there last year. So,
oh, really?
Just made the personal connection there. It was very interesting.
The best educational experience that I had.
Really?
Yes, I went to 2 colleges after that, and didn't learn nearly as much as I did at the High School of Music and Art.
Wow.
Yes.
And the education in the arts then certainly is something that we would say would be the foundation of what you've done. You must have known back then that this is. I think in the beginning you wanted to be a band leader, correct, and a singer.
Well, you bet. Hal Linden and his orchestra. I got cards printed up.
Wow, that's official then.
That's like a website in today's world. That's like a website, right? Just think about it.
I was gonna. That was my future, and I was good at it. I was very good at it. I was a professional musician for some 13 years before I slid over into the theater. So it wasn't, just a couple of years. But music changed on me. When I went into the Army in 1952 in the Korean War, and at that time there was Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, Count Basie, Duke, you name it. There was a height of the big band era. It was the best. When I came out of the Army, they were all disbanded, all gone. It was now Bill Haley and the Comets. So
rock and roll wasn't your thing?
The beginning of rock and roll.
Right.
And that's one of the things that propelled me out of the business. I was good at the music I knew. I was not very good at rock and roll. So that's when I slid over into the theater and made a career there.
And that's certainly something where, on our side, we appreciate that it did happen, but maybe that was a dream lost. But then again, after Barney Miller, and we'll talk about this in our next session, that you did, go back to performing music on stage, and we'll get to that right after this on Everything Old is New Again.
Okay.
I just want to remind everybody that certainly you're starring in the Samuel Project, and it's premiering again on April 28th. The red carpet begins at 6:30. That would be cool to be there to see that, and certainly the film is at 7, and it's going to be at the 13th annual Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival. You can get tickets at LAJFilmFest.org. LAJFilmFest.org. By the way, after the movie is going to be seen, there'll be a question and answer session with Hal Linden. So if there's still some questions after this interview, you have an opportunity then. We'll be back right after this, and Everything Old is New Again.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Now, we all know Hal Linden is a great comedy actor.
Yes, and we all know that Hal Linden is a terrific musical comedy star.
Did you also know that Hal Linden is quitting this show and going home?
Oh, when the Saints go marching in. Oh, when the Saints go marching in. I want to be in that number when the Saints go marching in.
There we go. We're back on Everything Old is New Again, listening to a little jazz clarinet there and some singing by Barney Miller himself, Hal Linden. I'm here, of course, with David Cohen. Mr. Linden, I don't know if you would have expected to hear that clip, but it does present us and introduce us to another world that you were in.
What show is that from?
The Muppet Show back in the 70s. How about that?
The Muppet. Oh, that's right, the Muppets. Oh, yes.
And
there you go.
They did use your skills on the clarinet. That was you we heard playing in that clip, correct?
I'll give you an interesting story about that, too. And I didn't realize. That was the first time I realized what had to be done. You pre-record, when you do musical numbers on television. You pre-record it in a studio so that you have good balance and everything, but then you have to play it on camera. So that means you have to play exactly what you recorded. And when you play jazz, who remembers what, it's not. I went crazy trying to remember, because if the fingers didn't match what I was playing, it wouldn't look like Hal Linden was playing it. Any clarinet player could have played it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I had to match exactly what jazz I played on the recording. Not easy.
And I don't know if everyone... See, that's the perfectionist in you that got you to the position that you are in, I would suggest, in that I don't know that everyone watching would have acknowledged that, but now that I see that, you're going to make me go back and watch that clip again because of what you just said. And talking about jazz, we've talked to Peter Weller, who's from RoboCop and some other shows, and he's involved in jazz, loves jazz. He plays out when he can. And you've played out quite a bit, for what I understand. I wonder, are you still doing that now on the clarinet every so often in a club or so?
Every so often. Well, I do have a concert act that I do in which there's a big section of clarinet. And I've also appeared with most of the major symphonies And I always do a movement of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, just since I got a symphony hanging around, why waste it? So I do a movement of the Mozart.
That's great stuff.
It's been a while. I have a little difficulty to get back into shape to do that again, but I still do jazz, yes.
And we know that you performed and sang on Broadway. And I just wanted to ask you, we've done a couple of shows about Broadway, and you see now that there's this new Frozen just opened up on Broadway. If you're familiar, filmed turned into a play, and we're seeing. I would say, I don't know the numbers, but it's almost like half of the shows on Broadway were movies first, and then become plays. And you're a real person that really has a great experience on Broadway and really has a foundation in both, but I would say more or less in the style of Broadway where a play is written for the stage. Do you prefer one or the other? What do you think of this trend? I'm not really an expert in this area.
It's not totally a new trend. Certainly many plays were turned into musicals in my day, in the golden age of Broadway.
Right.
A lot of plays were turned into musicals. Even motion picture. I'm trying to remember if I can remember a motion picture turned into a musical. But you now have it's a different era on Broadway. Certainly, the advent of Disney on Broadway. They took their whole repertoire, all of their old wonderful movies, and made them into Broadway musicals. So that really started it. But Broadway's always, they weren't always totally original. A lot of them came from books, came from plays. I Do was a Broadway play called The Four Poster, made into a musical. There were many Broadway plays that were made into musicals. And I suspect a couple of movies, but I can't really put my finger on one.
Right, it does bring some familiarity.
But now it's because of Disney, and they have all the Lion King and Aladdin, and it's easy to go into that kind of. They've got that library that they can use, and the resources to do it, so it gets done.
But do you think is it something that on the actor's side is preferred, or does it not really matter all that much, just as long as you're in a performance? Does that make sense?
Oh, you start day one with a piece of paper.
Right.
That's all. Doesn't matter where it came from.
Right.
For an actor, it's all. You start day one with a piece of paper, and you make your choices about who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. The same way, whether it came from a book, a musical, or just somebody's head.
There you go.
Doesn't matter.
And there are some classics out there, and I'm going to play a short clip of a little bit of a classic of a gentleman that you are familiar with.
Tell Mike it was only business. I always liked him.
He understands that.
Tom, can you get me off the hook? For old time's sake.
Can't do it, Sally.
There we go. Good old Fish himself, Abe Vigoda.
Abe Vigoda.
And he people, I don't know if we're going back a little bit, but The Godfather came first, and then he appeared on your show. And tell us the experience. He was only on for a couple of years, and then they spun him off into his own series for 2 years.
Right. Actually, Abe came up to meet with Danny Arnold about a different part. Huh. There was an Italian, I can't remember the name of the character at the time. It preceded Jack Sue, who sat at that desk. Originally, there was the character who sat at that desk had an Italian name, and Abe came up because of the association with The Godfather. He came up to see about that part. Wow. And Danny took one look at him and said, I have a different idea. And he created Fish just for Abe, because he saw that quality in Abe.
And that look, sometimes he would just have that look, sourpuss look,
yeah.
Yeah.
Danny was obviously a great,
He could spot that talent or spot a character.
He could spot, an opportunity.
Right. David?
What was it? Can you explain how just a day on the set of Barney Miller, because you work with such wonderful actors and the writers and the producers, but what was a day like?
I'll tell you, Barney was a little different from most other sitcoms. Most sitcoms rehearse 3 days. On the fourth day, you bring in the cameras and they block it so that everybody knows who's moving where. And on the fifth day, you do 2 shows, one in front of an audience. And that's the way we started. But Danny was such a perfectionist that he would he'd be working on the script till the last minute. So very often we would sit down to read, and we'd only have half a script because he was working on the second half. And they would come down page by page or scene by scene. Eventually, in about the 4th or 5th week, we didn't have the ending to the show. And so we had to cancel the audience because we couldn't do the show, and if you didn't have an ending, we didn't.
Wow.
And from there on, we did it without an audience, which was very interesting because, as I said before, that's one of the reasons I joined the show, because I thought I could work in front of an audience. But we found out that it really helped in what we were talking about before. We weren't now reaching for laughs from an audience. We were now reaching for the truth in the scene. And that's a different dynamic. So we did it. We would now rehearse 2 days and start shooting on the third day with the material that we had, like a picture. And we did it like a movie, but we did it in order, scene by scene, as the scenes came down to us. But I must say, very often, in the 8 years that we did it, we would shoot everything we had, and we still didn't have maybe the last 4 or 5 pages.
So it would just be scrapped?
And we would sit around and wait until Danny came down with the final scene. We'd read it, stage it, and shoot it, like a picture.
But sometimes it would never... There just wouldn't be an ending. And you'd...
Well, we...
Not when you began.
No, we just waited for it until Danny finalized it. But he was such a perfectionist that he wanted it to be exactly right.
And we'll be back.
It meant a lot of overtime, a lot of working late.
But it came out. It was worthwhile because it's something that lasts to this day. And we'll be back right after this with Hal Linden to finish our discussion. We're having a great time talking all things jazz, Barney Miller, and the Samuel Project. We'll be back right after this and continue on that.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Well, it looks like time's running out for us. Yeah, and for the show, too. So let's bring back our wonderful guest star, Mr. Hal Linden.
Damn it, it's good to see you.
It sure is. Yeah, tonight's been a disaster.
Has it, really?
Gee, I thought it was a terrific show.
What are you talking about? It was a lot of confusion and chaos, a lot of running around by mindless maniacs.
Yeah.
Sounds like Everything Old is New Again. We're here on Everything Old is New Again with Hal Linden.
Was that the Muppet Show?
The ever-present Muppet Show. I bet you didn't think when you woke up this morning that you'd be talking about the Muppets so much.
That was shot in London.
Oh, really?
Muppet Show was shot in England. I think a certain amount of years were, and we went over just to do that. It was just a wonderful experience.
How about that? And it introduces us to the idea that we have a limited time, of course, and we're enjoying our talks with Mr. Hal Linden. The question is, you're doing a project now or have done a project. It's called the Samuel Project, and we spoke about it a little bit. I just want to play a little bit of a clip here for that project and show a little bit more about what the movie's about.
This stain has been on this apron for several weeks. And every time I bring it in, you keep charging me for it.
Keep bringing it in.
You have a story that needs to be told.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell your story in pictures.
Dude, my dad wants me to take over the butcher shop. I just want to play music, man.
So Uma was your friend in Germany?
More like a guardian angel.
Art can unearth stories long buried, so marginalized they were never even told.
There we go. So we talked about this a little bit before, but this, I think, movie is interesting in that it's not this action-adventure Avengers business. It's going to talk about people and relationships and have a number of different themes. And I think what's interesting is you got some hard issues there because you're talking about the Holocaust, but also there's a retention of some humor that goes, it seems to go through the picture, through your characters. Is that something that happens every so often?
Oh, definitely. We set out specifically to do that. It's a very little story about just relationships. One of the things we kind of discovered after we finished it was that there are no villains. There are no villains in the whole story. It's just people trying to make ends meet and trying to get along in life, and they don't have time to do what they really should be spending their time doing. You talk about humor. We look for it. One of the things we kind of the question whether this was going to be the first Holocaust comedy,
right?
Because we tried to keep it as light and as humorous as possible. And you played one little clip, and you left out the punchline. When I say to the kid, "Do you know anything about World War II?" He says, "Yeah, sure, yeah, we beat the Nazis. I saw it, Private Ryan."
See that? That part wasn't on the trailer. I wish it was. That was
okay. Maybe they took it off intentionally. But the point is, well, you guys should know about it. That's what your show's about. A younger generation did not live through what we lived through, and doesn't have that experience. It's not unlike what you heard on the Barney clip about the Polish jokes. I can understand them, but not being Polish, I can never live them. And that's true about race relations in America. It's true about intergenerational problems, as Samuel Project is about. So it's about bringing the generations together. At least that's what the Samuel Project is about. And bringing the generations together, trying to get a common understanding of history through three generations' eyes.
Exactly, and that is sort of the mission statement of this show in some ways as well. And so I'm glad you caught that with us. But I think there's some more. There's more messages in there. I think as I see that there's the butcher and the dry cleaner's sons and grandsons. They want them to stay in those grounded professions as opposed to artists and musicians or following their dreams. Is that somewhat of a... Go ahead. Yes.
Isn't that what our generation said?
Right.
I mean, I was a musician from the age of 7 or 8, and and that's all I ever thought I was going to be, was a musician. But when I went to college, my parents were very interested that I got a college degree, that I was able, just in case,
How much did they pressure you to, were they happy about your decision to become a musician?
Well, they had, I was not the first musician in the family. I had 8 male cousins, all of us who studied music. And at one point, 5 of the 8 were professional musicians. Wow. So it was kind of, like the family business.
I see.
And I was the youngest. So I had all this history behind me. I don't think they ever wanted me to. We were not taught music to become professional musicians. My father was a music lover. He knew nothing about music. He said, "I just want, when you go to a concert, you should know what you're hearing. You should know something about the music." That was his whole idea about giving us music lessons. Of course, my brother spent his entire life as a musician. He was a world-renowned violist and viola teacher. And I spent, half of my life as a musician. So the best laid plans, huh?
Right. There you go, exactly. And talking about the Samuel Project, I mean, this Rotten Tomatoes website that kind of rate these movies, it's got a 97% rating, which is extraordinarily high. So it's getting a great early reviews here right off the bat. And I would say if you're interested, feel free to take a look at this at the 13th annual Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival, and that again is on April 28th. The red carpet's at 6:30. The film is at 7. Stick around for some question and answer afterwards. Get some with Mr. Hal Linden and the filmmakers. Get some tickets at lajfilmfest.org. And I'm sure the film will be released thereafter, where we can see it in theaters thereafter, correct?
Hopefully.
Right.
I'm not too sure what the distribution setup is. Once you make a picture, you go on to the next one.
Exactly.
But I got to tell you, as I made the picture, you have it in your head what it's going to look like. I was very, very happily surprised when I saw the final product. I think it's a little gem. It's not, again, nobody gets killed and no villains, so it's not going to be the edgy picture of the year, but I think it's a very satisfying picture.
Well, here's the thing. With everything old is new again behind you, we know for sure that we'll see it. It's all I can guarantee is the two of us will see it.
There you go.
And both of our listeners will see it too. So there's 4 right there, Hal.
No, but I'll tell you, it is something. Now, a lot of times these films, if for some reason it's not released in a wide release, there's a lot of platforms. Just go to the website. Just Google the Samuel Project, and they've got a website. And you can find this work of art. And I'm looking forward to seeing it myself once it's released. You can buy it on YouTube as well. I know that for sure. So there's many ways to see this, and it's important. It's something that also, like we like to talk about. You could share this movie from grandfather to son, just like it's represented in the movie, and you can have a family movie night and learn something, but also have some laughs and have a bonding experience even within the house, if that makes any sense.
Right, it certainly does. It is. Ryan Ochoa plays Eli, my grandson. Ryan is a big Disney star, and even in the making, you saw Ryan from his generation and Hal Linden from his generation coming together, even in the making, and finding something from that one generation can give to the other generation.
There you go. And I'll tell you something. Your career speaks for itself, and you've lasted the test of time, and you're still active and vibrant at all this time. Question is, how have you? If there's any words of wisdom, maybe you can present to us as to have such a successful career, whether it be an actor, performer, or anything that you follow or put your mind to. Is there some words of wisdom you might be able to lend to us in that regard? In a minute, how about that? I'll make it really easy for
you. Quickly, I'll tell you quickly, if I got a minute.
Yes.
When I graduated college, I had to go in the Army. It was the Korean War. So I knew that, so I took a job with a band on the road, went on the road with a band, which meant I left town before graduation, so I never picked up my diploma, so my mother never believed that I graduated. I didn't have a diploma, right?
Right.
So I would say, yeah, I graduated. She said, okay, if you say so. 50 years later, there was an organization that honored ex-New Yorkers in Los Angeles, and I was honored one year, and in the honoring, somebody actually must have heard that story and brought me a copy of my diploma.
Huh.
I now had a diploma. By this time, my mother was in her 90s, living in a retirement home in Orange County. I got in my car the next morning. I drove down specifically. Look, Ma, I see, here's my diploma. And she said, good. Now you got something to fall back on.
There you go.
So That's my
lesson for us all. Get that education and make sure you go the last day to get that piece of paper, right?
There you go. That's it. Okay.
Hal Linden, thank you so much for your time. We certainly appreciate it. We've had a great time. We had some fun. Hopefully you have as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the big screen in the Samuel Project.
Thank you,
Looking
Hal.
forward to it.
It was a pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.